Billionaire gave 4 unlimited credit cards to 4 women to test them, but what poor maid bought the envelope had no name on it. That was the first thing Celestine noticed when Mrs. Hargrove, the head housekeeper, slid it across the break room table on a Tuesday morning in late November. No name, no label, no explanation, just a crisp ivory envelope sealed with a small gold sticker that bore the initials C.D. Calloway Drexen. Celestine had worked in this house for 14 months. She knew those initials the way she knew the sound of the furnace kicking on at 5 a.m., the way she knew which marble tiles near the east wing clicked underfoot, the way she knew that the man who owned this mansion rarely came downstairs before 9. She knew his initials. She knew his coffee order. Black, no sugar, a single orange peel twisted over the cup. She knew that he gave to 3 different children's hospitals every December without telling anyone, because she was the one who ironed the thank you letters that came back. She did not know why his initials were on an envelope with her name, or rather, without her name, sitting on the break room table at 7:43 in the morning. "Open it," Mrs. Hargrove said. Her voice was flat, professional. She was already turning away, smoothing her uniform, the conversation apparently over before it began. Celestine opened the envelope. Inside was a single black card. Not black like a regular credit card. Black like something that had been designed specifically to communicate wealth. Matte, heavy, almost warm to the touch. The kind of card that didn't have a credit limit printed on it because the people who carried it didn't think in those terms. Embossed on the front in silver, Celestine Okafor, her name, her full name spelled correctly, with the accent she'd long since stopped expecting anyone to notice. There was a small note card beneath it. Use it however you need. No receipts required. No questions asked. C.D. Celestine read it twice. Then she set it down on the table and stared at it the way she stared at things when her brain needed a moment to catch up with her eyes. She was 26 years old. She had been cleaning other people's houses since she was 19. She had never held a credit card that wasn't tied to a balance she was already behind on. She picked the card back up and slipped it carefully into the breast pocket of her uniform, over her heart, the way her mother used to tuck important things, report cards, letters from her father, pressed flowers from funerals into the front pocket of her church dress. Then she finished her coffee and went to work. 3 floors above the break room, in an office that faced Lake Michigan, Calloway Drexen was watching 4 small screens. He'd had the security system upgraded 6 weeks ago, not because he was worried about theft, but because he'd become, in the quiet and somewhat embarrassing way of a man who had everything and trusted no one, deeply curious about people. About what they did when they thought no one was watching. About what they reached for when they thought the reaching was free. The idea had come to him at 2 in the morning, the way most of his ideas did, not as a plan, but as a question. If I gave someone everything, would I finally see who they actually were? He'd run the math. 4 women, 4 cards, no limit, no restrictions, 72 hours. He'd watch the footage. He'd have his answer. The 3 other women had already been called. Brianna Calloway, no relation, a coincidence she had weaponized into a joke at every dinner party for the past 2 years, had come to his office at 8 sharp, wearing the kind of casual clothes that cost more than most people's rent, and had taken the card the way she took everything he gave her, with a smile that was perfectly calibrated to communicate gratitude without suggesting need. She had kissed his cheek. She had said, "You're so thoughtful, Cal." She had left within 4 minutes. Tamsin Vega had called him Daddy when she opened hers, then laughed like it was a joke. Calloway had not laughed. She had not noticed. Yolanda Pierce had immediately begun narrating a shopping list she'd apparently been composing in her head for months. Aspen, Neiman Marcus, something about a ski chalet, before she'd even left the room. Then there was Celestine. He watched the break room feed. He watched her open the envelope. He watched her read the note card twice. He watched her sit still for almost 90 seconds, long enough that he leaned slightly forward in his chair. And he watched her place the card over her heart. Calloway Drexen was not a sentimental man. He had not been sentimental since his mother died when he was 31, and he had learned, in the brutal and clarifying way that grief teaches certain lessons, that sentiment was a liability he could not afford. He had built a real estate empire, spanning 12 cities, on the simple principle that emotion clouded judgment, and judgment was the only thing that lasted. He leaned forward anyway. By 11 o'clock, the footage from Brianna's card was already extraordinary. She had taken an Uber to the Magnificent Mile, Chicago's luxury corridor, Michigan Avenue lined with flagships and facades that existed to make wealth feel like a neighborhood. And she had not walked so much as processed, moving through stores the way a general moves through territory, assessing, claiming, moving on. Calloway watched the transaction feed update in real time on a separate monitor. His IT consultant, a quiet man named Devlin, who asked no questions and had signed enough NDAs to wallpaper a small apartment, had set up the system. $4,200 at Saks, $1 to $800 at a boutique he didn't recognize. A pause for lunch, $340, presumably with someone, presumably on his card. Then the transaction that made Devlin clear his throat from across the room, $28,400 at Hermes. That's the Birkin, Devlin said. I know what it is, Calloway said. He didn't say anything else. He watched the number sit on the screen. Tamsin's feed was next. She had gone straight to a jeweler on Wabash, efficient, he thought, almost admirably direct, and had emerged 40 minutes later with a Rolex Datejust in rose gold that retailed at $14,000. She had then gone to a wine bar, charged 2 bottles of Chateau Petrus to the card, and was apparently still there. Yolanda had called a travel agent, an actual human travel agent, a species Calloway had believed extinct, and had booked a 5-night private ski package in Aspen for a party of 4, herself, and based on the names she'd apparently provided, 3 friends who had not been invited to this particular exercise. The total was $22,000 and climbing. He sat back in his chair. He had expected this. He had expected all of this. He was a man who had spent 20 years watching people reveal themselves under pressure, and the pressure of unlimited money was, in his experience, the cleanest mirror there was. People didn't lie to money. They didn't perform for it. They simply became more of what they already were. He turned to the 4th screen. Celestine's card had not been used. He checked the time. 11:47 a.m. He pulled up the mansion's interior cameras. She was on the 3rd floor, changing linens in the guest suite, moving quietly, efficiently, with the focused calm she brought to everything. She paused at the window, the one that looked out over the lake, grey-green in November, the kind of cold water that made Chicago feel like the edge of something. And she stood there for a moment, just looking. Then she went back to the sheets. Calloway watched her smooth a pillowcase with the flat of her palm, corner to corner, no wrinkle left behind. He realized he had been holding his breath. At 1:15 p.m., Celestine knocked on the door of Mrs. Hargrove's small office off the service corridor. I was wondering, she said, if I could take my lunch break a little early today, maybe 90 minutes instead of 60. I'll make up the time at the end of the shift. Mrs. Hargrove looked up over her reading glasses. Everything all right? Yes, ma'am. I just have an errand I need to run. Calloway, watching the corridor camera from his office, sat up. He watched Celestine collect her coat from the staff closet. A wool coat, dark navy, the kind that had been washed enough times to soften at the elbows, and wrap a scarf around her throat. He watched her check her phone. He watched her pat the left side of her chest once, the way you check for something you need to make sure you haven't forgotten. The black card. She was checking that it was still there. She took the service exit to the street. Calloway was on his feet before he'd made a decision. He crossed to the window and watched her walk south on the sidewalk below, head down against the November wind, shoulders forward, moving with the purposeful unhurry of someone who knows exactly where they're going and has calculated precisely how long it will take to get there. He stood at the window for a long time after she disappeared around the corner. Behind him, on the monitor, Brianna's card registered another transaction. He didn't look at it. He didn't know yet what Celestine was doing with his card. He didn't know which streets she walked, which door she pushed open, what she said to the person behind which counter, what she handed over and what she walked away with. He didn't know any of it yet, but he knew, in the way that a man who has spent his whole life reading people sometimes knows a thing before he can explain it, that whatever she was buying, it was not going to be anything he expected. He had designed this test to reveal character. He had not expected it to reveal his own. The monitor updated. Celestine's card, 1:34 p.m. First transaction. Calloway turned from the window. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and leaned close to the screen. Here it comes, he thought. He was not prepared for what he saw. What they bought. The first transaction was 1247s. Calloway read it twice. He read it the way he read numbers that didn't make sense. Not with disbelief, but with the careful, deliberate attention of a man who has learned that the numbers that confuse him the most are usually the ones telling him the truest story. 1247. Merchant. Walgreens. Michigan Ave. He pulled up the itemized receipt through Devlin's feed. The system had access to transaction-level data, which meant he could see not just the total, but the line items, a feature he'd requested and that Devlin had implemented without comment, the way Devlin implemented everything. The list came up. Children's Tylenol, 4-FLOs, $8.99. Generic ibuprofen, 24CT, $3.48. Calloway stared at the screen. Children's Tylenol. He had given this woman an unlimited credit card, no ceiling, no restriction, backed by an account that had never once registered concern at any purchase, and her first transaction, after 14 months of cleaning his house on a salary he now suddenly felt was embarrassingly insufficient, was $8.99 for children's fever medicine. He sat back in his chair. On the screen to his left, Brianna's card updated again. $608 at a beauty counter. On his right, Yolanda's Aspen booking had finalized at $2,300. He turned back to Celestine's feed. 1:51 p.m. Second transaction. Merchant Jewel Osco, S. Michigan AV. He requested the itemized receipt. It took Devlin 11 seconds to pull it up. Calloway read it slowly, the way you read something when you want to make sure you're not misreading it. When you want to make sure the story the numbers are telling is the one they're actually telling and not the one you're hoping for. White rice, 5 lb bag, $4.29 bread, whole wheat loaf, $3.19 eggs, 1 dozen, $3.89, whole milk, 1 gallon, $4.49, canned tomatoes, X2, $2.58 onions, 3 lb bag, $2.99, chicken thighs, family pack, $11.47 bananas, $1.23, canned black beans, X3, $3.87, frozen vegetables medley, $2.99, pasta, X2 boxes, $3.58, oatmeal, large container, $5.29, orange juice, 1 gallon, $4.19 butter, 1 lb, $5.49 baby formula, 12 Oz, $18.99 total, $78.52. Calloway did not move for a long time. He was aware of the sounds of the room around him, the low hum of the building's HVAC system, a distant phone ringing somewhere in the East Wing offices, traffic sounds muffled through triple-pane glass. But he was not inside those sounds. He was inside the list. Baby formula, chicken thighs, 5 pounds of rice. She was feeding someone. She was feeding a family. A real family, the kind with a baby, the kind where someone had to think about how many cans of beans stretched across how many meals, the kind where the difference between generic ibuprofen and brand name was a calculation you made automatically, without thinking, because you had been making it your whole life. He thought about the Birkin bag. He thought about $28,000 sitting in a store on Michigan Avenue, wrapped in tissue paper. Going home in an orange box, he thought about $78.52 worth of groceries. He pressed his hand flat against his desk and kept it there, grounding himself the way his mother had taught him to do when emotion threatened to outpace sense. Feel the surface, Cal. Feel something solid. And he breathed. At 2:22 p.m., the third and final transaction came through. Merchant, Rush University Medical Center, patient services, amount $140. No itemized receipt available. Medical copay, processed through the card's payment portal. But Devlin, without being asked, had flagged the associated documentation. A partial appointment record, the kind that showed on the payment side without disclosing protected health information. Patient account, Okafor, D. Pediatric pulmonology. Devlin turned from his workstation across the room. She paid a medical copay, he said unnecessarily. Looks like a pediatric specialist. Pulmonology, that's lungs. Kids with asthma, usually. I know what pulmonology is, Calloway said. Right. Devlin turned back to his screen. Okafor, her last name. The patient's last name was Okafor. A child. A child in her family with a pulmonologist, which meant a child with a chronic condition, the kind you managed over months and years, the kind that had regular appointments and recurring copays, and the particular low-grade financial pressure of something that never fully resolved, only continued. Calloway thought about Celestine checking the card against her chest before she left the house. He thought about her standing at the window with the grey lake behind her, smoothing a pillowcase with the flat of her palm. He thought, she was calculating. She had a list. She already knew exactly what she was going to do with it. The card. The unlimited, no-ceiling, no-questions-asked card of a billionaire. She had spent $230.49, $12 for fever medicine, $78 for groceries, $140 for a child's doctor's visit. Total. That was the total. That was everything. At 4 p.m., Calloway called Devlin into his office and told him to close the feed. Devlin closed it. He gathered his equipment with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned not to read rooms too carefully, because reading them too carefully in this job occasionally told you things you weren't paid to know. At the door, he paused. Should I archive the full transaction records for all 4 cards? Yes, Calloway said. Devlin nodded. Then almost to the door, almost out of the room, he said, very quietly, not looking back, the Maid's total was $231.49. I know, Calloway said. In case you wanted it, Devlin said, in writing. He left. Calloway sat alone in the office for a long time. The lake was darkening outside. November in Chicago meant the light left early and without ceremony, the sky going from grey to deeper grey to the particular bruised purple of 5 o'clock in November that made the city feel both very large and very old. He thought about what the 3 other women had bought. Brianna, $28,400 for a bag, plus smaller transactions throughout the day. Beauty, lunch, a boutique he still didn't recognize. Final total when he'd last checked, $36,200 and not finished. Tamsin, $14,000 Rolex, 2 bottles of wine at $900 each. A dinner that was still ongoing based on the last transaction. Estimated final total somewhere north of $18,000. Yolanda, the Aspen booking alone was $24,300. There had been subsequent transactions for ski equipment, a private lesson package, something at a boutique in the hotel's lobby. Estimated total, $31,000 and climbing. He thought about what they had bought. He thought about what Celestine had bought. He tried to remember the last time a person had surprised him. Genuinely surprised him. Not the pleasant, performative surprise of a birthday party or an unexpected gift, but the deep, disorienting surprise of discovering that the world contained a thing you hadn't known was possible. A kind of person you hadn't known existed. He couldn't remember. He was 42 years old, and he had built half the skyline visible from this window, and he had sat in rooms with presidents, and he had negotiated billion-dollar deals in languages he'd learned specifically for the negotiation, and he could not remember the last time a person had made him feel like he had missed something fundamental, like he had been looking at the wrong screen for a very long time. 231.49. He opened his desk drawer and took out a legal pad. He wrote the number down. He wrote it large, the way you write something you want to be able to read across a room, and then he set the pen down and looked at it. Children's medicine, groceries, a copay. He thought about his mother. His mother had been a woman who counted things, not in the way of a person who was afraid of not having enough, in the way of a person who understood that counting was a form of respect, that knowing the exact price of a gallon of milk was the same as knowing the exact value of the effort it took to earn it. She had not been poor, not exactly, but she had been careful in the way of someone who remembered when careful was all you had. He had forgotten that. He had forgotten it the way you forget things that no longer apply to your circumstances, and the forgetting had felt, until this moment, completely unremarkable. Celestine Okafor had spent $231.49 of an unlimited credit card on medicine, groceries, and a child's medical appointment, and in doing so, she had somehow made him remember something he hadn't known he'd lost. He slept badly. He was not a man who slept badly. He had trained himself, with the same methodical determination he brought to everything, to view sleep as an operational necessity, no different from fueling a machine, and he approached it accordingly. Same hour, same darkness, same precise temperature in the room, the lake visible through partially open curtains, because he'd grown up near water and still needed to sense it at the edge of things. But that night, he lay awake. He kept seeing the list, not Brianna's receipt, not the $28,400 Birkin that was currently, presumably sitting in its orange box in the apartment he was paying for, but the other one, the grocery list, the eggs and the rice and the chicken thighs and the baby formula, the specific, deliberate, practiced economy of a person who knew exactly what was needed and had allocated exactly that, not a dollar over. He thought. She didn't hesitate. That was the thing that kept coming back to him. Celestine had not stared at the card for 3 hours, trying to decide what she deserved. She had not drafted a wish list or browsed luxury websites or called a friend to say, "You won't believe what just happened." She had walked to a pharmacy and a grocery store and a hospital because those were the places that needed to be walked to, and she had done it as quickly and efficiently as she did everything else. And then she had come back to the mansion and finished her shift. He had checked the timestamps. She had been back by 3:10 p.m., back in uniform, back on the 3rd floor, finishing the guest suite she'd left mid-shift for her errand. He'd found the footage. 3:14 p.m., Celestine remaking the bed she'd already half-made that morning, smoothing the same pillowcase with the same flat-palmed precision, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just spent the afternoon doing more genuine good with his money than he had done in the past 6 months with his entire philanthropic budget. He pressed his face into the pillow. He was not falling in love with her. He was observing something. He was observing a kind of integrity he had not encountered in a very long time, perhaps ever, perhaps since his mother, and the observation had destabilized something in him that he couldn't name yet, but that felt, uncomfortably, like something important coming loose. He was not falling in love with her. He was simply going to have to do something. He made his decision at 6 a.m. while it was still dark, the lake invisible but audible, that particular November sound of cold water. Persistent and indifferent, he picked up his phone and sent a single text to his assistant Miriam. Set up a meeting with the 4 women for 9 a.m. tomorrow, all 4, my office. Then he lay back and watched the ceiling until the light started to come. He thought about what he was going to say. He thought about how Brianna was going to react. He thought about Celestine's face when he called her upstairs. The way her expression would arrange itself into careful professional neutrality. The way she would stand just inside the door, not presuming to come further in, not assuming anything about why she had been called or what was about to happen. He thought about the list: rice, bread, eggs, children's medicine, a copay for a child with a lung condition. He thought, I have been looking at the wrong things for a very long time. He did not sleep again. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, lying awake felt like something other than waste. It felt like the beginning of a correction. The morning, after the meeting, was set for 9 o'clock. By 8:30, all 3 of them were already in the waiting area outside Calloway's office. Brianna on the leather settee nearest the window, legs crossed, phone in hand, wearing the kind of composed expression that required a great deal of effort to maintain while still appearing effortless. Tamsin beside her, quieter than usual, picking at the edge of her thumbnail. Yolanda standing near the credenza, pretending to examine a sculpture she had seen a dozen times before. None of them spoke. They had been told only that Calloway wanted to see all 4 of them together, the 4th being the maid, and that detail, relayed by Miriam with the same breezy professionalism she used for everything, had landed in each of them like a small, cold stone dropped into still water. The maid. Brianna had not said anything when she heard it. She had simply nodded and ended the call and stood very still in her apartment for approximately 30 seconds, the kind of stillness that precedes a decision rather than following one. Then she had taken a shower, done her hair, and selected a dress that cost $4,000, and communicated in every line and seam that she was the kind of woman who belonged in rooms like this. She belonged in this room. She had belonged in this room for 2 years. At 8:55, Miriam appeared at the hallway door. Mr. Drexen is ready. And then, with the faintest pause, almost imperceptible, Ms. Okafor isn't here yet. He said to start without her and she'll join when she arrives. Brianna smiled. Good. Celestine was on the 2nd floor when Miriam found her. She was cleaning the bathroom in the blue suite, a task that required kneeling, and she was on her knees when the door opened, sponge in hand, working the grout along the base of the tub with the focused attention she gave everything. She looked up. Mr. Drexen would like you in his office, Miriam said. As soon as you're ready. No rush. The others are already there. Celestine nodded. She finished the section of grout she was working on. 4 more inches completed, and then stood, stripped her gloves, rinsed her hands at the sink, and checked her reflection in the mirror with the brisk, impersonal assessment of someone who was checking for cleanliness rather than beauty. She dried her hands. She straightened her uniform. She walked upstairs. The office was large in the way of rooms that have been designed to communicate something specific about the person who occupies them. Not ostentatiously large, not the square footage of a man who needs to compensate for something, but large in the deliberate way of someone who had decided that space itself was a form of precision. The desk was dark walnut, clear of everything except a legal pad, a pen, and a single sheet of paper that Celestine, entering last, could not read from the door. Calloway stood at the window with his back to them. He turned when she came in. His eyes found her first. She noticed this, filed it, did not interpret it, and then moved across the room to the 3 women on the other side of his desk. Sit down, he said. to all of them. Brianna sat. Tamsin sat. Yolanda sat. Celestine, finding no available chair, stood to one side near the door, hands clasped in front of her, professional and still. Calloway looked at her. "There's a chair in the corner, Celestine, please." She retrieved it. She sat. He remained standing. "I'm not going to spend a lot of time on preamble," he said. His voice was level, not cold, not warm, the voice of a man who had made a decision and moved through the world from the other side of it. 3 days ago, I gave each of you access to a card with no spending limit and no conditions. I watched what you did with it." The room was completely silent. "Brianna," he looked at her, "you spent $36,200. Brianna held his gaze. "You said no conditions." "I did," he nodded. "Tamsin, $18,400. Tamsin looked at the desk. "Yolanda, $31,000, including a ski trip you booked for yourself and 3 people who were not part of any arrangement I made." Yolanda opened her mouth, closed it. Calloway picked up the sheet of paper from his desk. "Celestine spent $231.49. He set the paper back down. "She bought children's medicine, groceries for her family, and paid a copay for her brother's medical appointment. That was the total. She was back at work by 3:10 in the afternoon." The silence that followed was of a particular quality, the silence of 3 women recalibrating. Brianna spoke first. Her voice was smooth, practiced, carrying just enough lightness to suggest she found the situation mildly absurd rather than threatening. "Cal, are you seriously comparing what we spent to what the—" She stopped herself, recalibrated. "Are you turning this into some kind of morality exercise?" "I'm not turning it into anything," Calloway said. "I'm telling you what happened." He looked at each of them in turn. "The cards are being cancelled. The Hermes purchase has already been reversed." He said it quietly, the way you say a thing you've already thought about fully and arrived at. "Tamsin, the Rolex will be collected from your apartment this afternoon. Yolanda, the Aspen booking has been cancelled and refunded. If there are any additional charges on any of the cards that haven't already processed, they won't be going through." Brianna stood up. She stood up with the slow, controlled deliberateness of a woman who understood that how you rose from a chair in a moment like this was part of the message. 2 years, she said. Her voice had changed. The lightness was gone. Underneath it was something harder, something real. 2 years, Calloway. You gave me a credit card with no rules and no limit, and then you punish me for using it. That is... It's not a punishment, he said. It feels like one. It's a conclusion, he said. I reached a conclusion. Brianna looked at Celestine. The look lasted approximately 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, something passed across Brianna's face that Celestine recognized, not because she had ever been the target of it before, but because she had grown up in neighborhoods where that look was a known quantity. A weather system you learned to read before it arrived. It was the look of a woman who had decided that if she was going down, she was not going down alone. So, this is about her, Brianna said. This is about character, Calloway said. And what I'm able to see clearly now that I couldn't before. Brianna picked up her bag. I'll have my lawyer call yours, she said. I'm sure there are things worth discussing. She left. Tamsin and Yolanda followed within 90 seconds of each other, neither of them saying anything meaningful, both of them avoiding Celestine's eyes with the particular deliberateness of people who are embarrassed on behalf of someone else's behavior and don't want to claim any part of it. Then it was just Calloway and Celestine in the large, quiet office. He sat down at his desk, not in the formal behind-the-desk way. He moved to the front of the desk and sat on its edge, which changed the quality of the room entirely. Less official, more human. I'm sorry, he said. for making you sit through that. It's your house, Celestine said. Your meeting. Still. He looked at her. Can I ask you something? She nodded. Why didn't you buy anything for yourself? She looked at him steadily. Not the look of someone who didn't understand the question, the look of someone who had expected it and had already decided how to answer it. There were people who needed it more than I needed a handbag, she said. Simple. Flat. No performance attached to it. Calloway was quiet for a moment. Your brother, he said. Pulmonology. That's asthma. Something crossed her face. Brief, involuntary, the flash of a person who hadn't expected to be known. You saw the receipt. I saw the merchant category. I didn't see anything protected. He held her gaze. Is he okay? He's managing, she said. He has been for 3 years. It's something we're on top of. We. The weight of that word. The way it contained a whole household. I'd like to offer you a promotion, Calloway said. Head of Household Management, reporting directly to Miriam. Salary increase, benefits upgrade, and a private health insurance plan that would cover your brother as a dependent. Celestine looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Thank you, but I'd like to keep my current position. He blinked. I'm offering you. I know what you're offering. Her voice was gentle but absolutely firm. And I appreciate it, I do. But I don't want a promotion because I bought groceries instead of a handbag. I want to keep doing my job well because that's how I keep my job, and my job is how I take care of my family. She paused. If that makes sense. It made more sense than anything he'd heard in years. It makes sense, he said quietly. She stood, the gesture of a person who has concluded a meeting rather than been dismissed from one. Is there anything else you need, Mr. Drexen? He looked up at her from the edge of the desk. She was a few feet away, standing in her navy uniform in the large, quiet room, and there was something about the particular quality of that moment. The angle of the morning light, the stillness, the fact that she was the only person he had spoken to in years who seemed completely uninterested in what he could give her. That made something in his chest go very still. No, he said. Thank you, Celestine. She nodded once. She walked to the door. She had her hand on the frame when he said, without planning to, The groceries. Did it help? She stopped, turned slightly, not fully. My brother's fever broke last night, she said, and my mother made rice and beans for dinner. So yes. A pause. It helped. She left. Calloway sat on the edge of his desk in the large, quiet room and looked at the door she had closed behind her, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time and wasn't entirely sure he was equipped to handle. He felt, for the first time in years, like he wanted to know what came next. The sabotage begins. It started on a Thursday. Celestine knew it had started the way you know weather is changing before the sky changes. Something in the air, a pressure shift. The way certain people stopped meeting her eyes in the service corridor. Louisa, who mopped the lower level and had always greeted her with a nod and a quiet buenos dias, looked away on Thursday morning. Terence, who handled the grounds and occasionally shared the break room with her during overlapping lunch schedules, suddenly had somewhere else to be. By Friday, 2 people had called in sick. By Saturday, she understood. She was coming out of the linen closet on the 2nd floor when she heard Mrs. Hargrove's voice carrying through the half-open door of the housekeeper's office, not Mrs. Hargrove's usual clipped, professional tone, but a lower register, the voice of a woman who was being careful and didn't like having to be careful. I'm only telling you what I've been hearing, Mrs. Hargrove said. I'm not saying I believe it. What exactly are you hearing? A voice Celestine didn't recognize, one of the afternoon staff maybe. That she kept the card, that she only spent a little so it wouldn't look suspicious, but she kept it. That she's been friendly with Mr. Drexen in ways that aren't appropriate for her position. A pause. I don't believe it either, the unknown voice said. But 2 people quit over it. That means something. 2 people quit because someone told them to be uncomfortable, Mrs. Hargrove said more sharply. That's different. Celestine stood in the hallway with the stack of fresh linens against her chest and the particular stillness of a person who has just heard her name turned into a story she doesn't recognize. She had not kept the card. She had returned it to Mrs. Hargrove the morning after the errand, placed neatly back in its ivory envelope, and Mrs. Hargrove had taken it without comment. She had not been friendly with Mr. Drexen in any way that was not perfectly correct. She had been called to his office for a meeting, she had answered his questions honestly, and she had gone back to work. That was the complete inventory of their interaction. She walked back to the linen closet, put the fresh sheets away, and stood in the small room for a moment with the door closed. She thought, this is Brianna. She didn't know how she knew. She just knew. The way you recognize the shape of something by its shadow before you can see the thing itself. She opened the door and went back to work. By the following Monday, she had the fuller picture. It came in pieces, the way these things always do. A fragment from Louisa, who had thawed slightly and felt guilty about it. A sentence from Miriam, who had heard things through the building's internal channel and mentioned them to Celestine with the careful indirection of someone who wanted to warn without implicating. A direct account from a young woman named Priya, who worked the afternoon kitchen shift and had zero patience for what she called exactly this kind of nonsense. The story being circulated was as follows. Celestine had not returned the credit card. She had used it. Not at Walgreens, not at Jewel Osco, not at the medical center, but at private jewelry stores and cash advance locations, stripping money off the account in ways that wouldn't show up as luxury purchases. The small, legitimate charges were a cover. She had been skimming from Mr. Drexen for months through various channels. The card was simply the most recent. She had also, the story went, been deliberately engineering proximity to Mr. Drexen, targeting him romantically as a strategy for financial security. The credit card situation had been, in this version of events, part of the plan all along. It was an elegant lie. Celestine understood immediately why it was elegant. It took the true story, a woman with modest spending and honest motives, and inverted it perfectly, so that the exact things that were real became evidence for something that wasn't. Her small purchases, suspicious because too small. Her returned card, suspicious because she'd had time to use it first. Her conversation with Calloway in his office, suspicious because private. Someone had thought about this carefully. Someone had been angry enough to think very carefully. On Wednesday, Mrs. Hargrove called Celestine into her office. She closed the door. She sat across from Celestine with her hands folded on her desk and the specific expression of a woman who has been doing a difficult job for a long time and has learned to separate what she feels from what she has to do. I need to ask you some questions, she said, and I need you to answer them honestly because I intend to take whatever you tell me at face value and proceed accordingly. Ask, Celestine said. Did you return the card you were given? Yes. To you, personally, the morning of the 21st. I placed it in the original envelope. Did you use it for any purpose other than what appeared on the transaction record? No. Has your relationship with Mr. Drexen been anything other than professional? No. Mrs. Hargrove looked at her for a long moment. The look was not suspicious. It was the look of a woman taking a careful measurement of something she wanted to get right. I believe you, she said. For what it's worth. It's worth a great deal, Celestine said quietly. There are people on the staff who are unsettled. 2 have already resigned. I don't know how many more are considering it. Mrs. Hargrove's voice stayed even. I want to be honest with you. Regardless of the source, when staff disruption reaches this level, it creates pressure on me to address it. And the path of least resistance in situations like this is to address it at the point of friction. Celestine understood what she was being told. You are the point of friction. Not through any fault she had committed, but through the simple arithmetic of disruption. When something causes turbulence, the easiest solution is to remove the thing rather than investigate the turbulence. I understand, Celestine said. I'm not doing that, Mrs. Hargrove said. I want to be clear. I'm not asking you to go. I'm asking you to be patient while I work this out. Celestine nodded. She stood. She had her hand on the door when Mrs. Hargrove said, with something that was almost, not quite, gentle, How are you holding up? Celestine considered the question with the same honest attention she gave everything. I've dealt with harder things, she said. I'll be okay. On Thursday evening, Calloway found out. He found out the way he found out most things that happened in his own house. Not because anyone told him directly, because direct information was something people in his orbit had learned to withhold in the instinct-driven way that prey withholds information from predators, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. But through Miriam, who had placed a single sheet of paper on his desk at 5:15 with a handwritten note that said only, "You should know what's being said downstairs." He read the page, the summary of the rumors, the 2 resignations, Mrs. Hargrove's conversations, the careful, inverted fiction that someone had constructed around Celestine's actual, documented, receipted behavior. He was very still while he read it. Then he picked up his phone and called Brianna. She answered on the second ring. "Cal," her voice was even, prepared. "I know it's you," he said. A pause, long enough to be acknowledgement without being admission. "I don't know what you're referring to. You're spreading lies about Celestine to my staff. You've caused 2 people to quit and created enough disruption that Mrs. Hargrove is under pressure to fire her." His voice was quiet, quieter than anger usually sounds, which meant it was more serious. "Stop. Today. If one more person on my staff is approached, if one more piece of this story circulates, I will involve my lawyers in a way that will be specifically uncomfortable for you. Do you understand me?" Another pause. "You're really doing this," she said. "Over a maid." "Over a person," he said. "Yes." He ended the call. He sat at his desk for a moment. Then he stood and walked downstairs, something he rarely did in the evening when the staff had shifted to their reduced hours routines and the house settled into its nighttime quiet. He walked to the service wing, to the small hallway outside Mrs. Hargrove's office, where the schedule board listed current assignments. Celestine was on linen rotation. West wing, 3rd floor. He found her in the hallway outside the ivory suite, folding a fitted sheet the way his mother used to fold them, with the corners tucked in precise sequence, the fabric meeting itself exactly, nothing trailing. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. "Mr. Drexen." Neutral. Professional. "I know what's been happening," he said. "I've handled the source. It should stop." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her expression. Not gratitude exactly, not relief exactly, but the complicated emotion of a person who has been fighting alone and has just been told they don't have to fight alone anymore, and isn't sure yet what to do with that information. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know." He paused. "I wanted to." She looked back at the sheet in her hands. She finished the fold, corner to corner, exact, and set it on the cart. 3 people have already started looking for other positions because of this, she said. "If any of them leave, that's on me. I don't want that." "That's on whoever started it," he said. "Not you." "That's not how it works in the real world," she said, not unkindly. Blame attaches to the nearest body. The people leaving aren't wrong to leave. They're just protecting themselves. I understand that. He stood in the hallway and looked at her. This woman who had spent her afternoon off buying medicine and rice and beans, who had declined a promotion because she didn't want to be rewarded for her character, who was now defending the people who had believed lies about her because she understood their logic and didn't hold it against them. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You keep asking me that," she said. Not sharp, almost amused. The first time he'd heard anything like amusement from her. "I keep having questions," he said. A beat, her mouth almost moved. "Ask," she said. "Would you have dinner with me? Not—" He stopped himself before it became something it wasn't ready to be. "The staff, the whole staff. I'd like to do a dinner, for everyone. I do it at Thanksgiving every year, but I'd like to do one sooner. This week, if possible. A way of resetting things." She considered this. "That's a kind idea," she said carefully. But if it's because of me, it might make things worse. It'll look like you're taking a side." "I am taking a side," he said. "I'm taking the side of the person who spent $200 of my money on a sick child and a family dinner." He held her gaze. "I'm allowed to take that side." Celestine looked at him for a long moment. In the soft light of the corridor, with the sheet folded neatly on the cart between them, there was a quality to the silence that was different from the professional silences they had shared before. Less managed, less careful, more like the silence between two people who have just acknowledged something without saying it. She was the first to look away. "I should finish this floor," she said. "Of course." He took a step back. He was almost to the staircase when she said quietly, directed at the linen cart rather than at him, "Thank you for handling it." He paused on the stairs. "You're welcome." He climbed back to his floor. He stood at his office window for a long time, looking at the lake. He thought about her voice when she said thank you, the texture of it, the deliberate way she aimed it at the cart instead of at him, as if gratitude directed at his face was a proximity she wasn't ready for. He thought, "I need to be careful." He thought, "I am already not being careful." He pressed his hand flat against the cold window glass and stood there until the thought settled into something he could put back in its place. It didn't entirely settle. It hadn't entirely settled by the time he went to bed. And for the third night in a row, he lay awake, listening to the lake. And he thought about a woman folding a sheet in a hallway with the corner tucked in exactly. Nothing trailing, nothing wasted, everything in its right place. He thought, "She is the most careful person I have ever met." And he thought, "I am the least careful I have been in 20 years. The irony was not lost on him. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep for a long time. Secrets surface. He found the books on a Tuesday night at 11:43. He hadn't planned to be in the break room. He'd been in his office until past 11, a call with a developer in Vancouver that ran long, the way calls with developers in Vancouver always ran long, every timeline a negotiation, every budget a living document. And when it finally ended, he was too restless to go upstairs and too tired to do anything useful. So he walked down to the kitchen, intending to find whatever was left from the afternoon and eat it standing at the counter, the way he sometimes did when no one was watching. The kitchen was dark. The break room door was slightly open, a narrow band of light falling into the hallway, and he almost walked past it. He wasn't in the habit of entering the staff spaces after hours, not out of formality but out of a sense of boundaries that he'd always considered decent. But something made him stop. Not a sound, not a voice, just the light. He pushed the door open. The break room was empty. Someone had left the overhead light on, or not quite left it on, because on the table beneath the light was a spread of materials that had clearly been in active use recently. A large textbook open to a page, dense with reading comprehension passages. Several sheets of handwritten notes in a careful small script, a set of flashcards held together with a rubber band, and beside them, a mechanical pencil and a half-empty mug of tea that was still faintly warm when Calloway pressed his hand around it without thinking. He looked at the materials more carefully. The textbook was an SAT prep guide, the official College Board edition, the thick one, flagged with paper tabs at dozens of sections. The handwritten notes were organized by category: evidence-based reading, math, no calculator, writing and language. Each section had its own color of ink: blue for notes, red for corrections, black for new vocabulary words, of which there were pages. The flashcards, when he slipped the rubber band off and fanned them, were vocabulary cards, handwritten on both sides, hundreds of them, organized into small bundles by difficulty level. He set the cards down carefully. He looked at the notes again. The handwriting was precise and consistent, the handwriting of someone who had been taught to write carefully and had kept the habit. At the top of the first page, in the same careful script, D's practice test No. 4, corrections, D. Okafor, D. The name from the medical record, the brother. The child with the pulmonologist. Celestine had been sitting in this break room after her shift, presumably, or on breaks, or at whatever hours she could find, tutoring her brother for the SATs. Not having him come to the mansion, which would have been noticed and possibly complicated. Working through his practice tests herself first, annotating them, preparing explanations, sending him the materials somehow, doing the intellectual preparation alone so that when she sat with him on weekends, on her days off, at their mother's kitchen table in whatever neighborhood they lived in, she would already know where he'd made each mistake and exactly how to explain it. Calloway sat down at the break room table. He sat in the chair Celestine probably sat in, the one facing the door, with the best light from the overhead fixture, and he looked at the open page of the prep guide and the column of corrections in red ink and the vocabulary cards fanned out across the formica, and he felt something shift in his chest with the specific, irreversible quality of a lock being turned. He already knew she was good. He had known that since the grocery receipt, since the medical copay, since the conversation in his office when she declined a promotion with such complete unperformed dignity that it had taken him the rest of the day to process. He knew she was good. He hadn't known she was this. He hadn't known that behind the navy uniform and the flat-palmed sheet smoothing and the professional neutrality she wore like a second skin. There was a woman who stayed after hours in a break room to work through practice test corrections in 3 colors of ink for a brother who couldn't afford a tutor, because she was the tutor, because she had always been the tutor, because being the person who filled the gaps was apparently just what she did. He stayed at the table for a long time. He did not move the materials. He did not take notes. He did not do anything that would indicate the room had been entered or the books examined. He simply sat there in the break room of his own house at 11:43 on a Tuesday night, looking at the handwriting of a woman who had been quietly extraordinary in a room he rarely visited, and he understood, with the clean, arriving certainty of something that has been true for a while finally being recognized, that he was in serious trouble. He didn't know the full story until the following Sunday. He got it in pieces. The way you sometimes get the stories that matter most, not delivered whole, but assembled over time from separate sources, none of them aware they were contributing to the same picture. The first piece came from Miriam, who handled his household accounts and had, in the process of cross-referencing insurance documents, noticed that Celestine's employment application from 14 months ago had listed her prior education as some college, when her writing and organizational skills were markedly inconsistent with that level. "It's not relevant to her position," Miriam said carefully, placing the observation in front of him the way you place something fragile on a table. "I just noticed it." Calloway said nothing. He filed it. The second piece came from a conversation he overheard, not eavesdropping, genuinely accidental, the kind of thing that happens in large houses where sound carries in unexpected directions. Between Priya from the kitchen staff and another woman whose name he didn't know, conducted in the hallway outside the pantry. "She speaks French," Priya was saying, "like actual French, and Mandarin. I heard her on the phone with her mother switching between all three like it was nothing. Where did she learn that? I don't know. I think she went to school for a while. Something happened and she stopped." The third piece came from Celestine herself, though she didn't know she was giving it to him. It was a Saturday afternoon, quiet in the house. The kind of winter Saturday in Chicago where the sky was the exact flat white of a sheet of printer paper, and the whole city seemed to have gone indoors. Calloway was coming down the back stairs, a route he took occasionally when he didn't want to encounter anyone, and he passed the small sitting room off the second-floor landing, the one that was used for nothing in particular and mostly held overflow furniture. The door was slightly open. Celestine was inside, on her phone. Not hiding, the door was open, she'd have heard anyone coming, but clearly in what she thought was a private moment, because her voice was different, softer. The professional flatness gone entirely, replaced by something warmer and more textured. The voice of a person who is fully themselves. She was speaking French. Calloway understood French. He had learned it at 28 specifically for a Paris acquisition and had kept it up because he'd found, unexpectedly, that he liked the language, liked the way it forced a different precision on him, a different way of constructing meaning. He understood enough to follow. She was talking to her mother. He caught fragments. "Il va bien, maman. Les notes sont meilleures cette semaine." "He's doing well, mama. The grades are better this week." Je sais que c'est difficile. I know it's hard." And then quieter, the sentence that stopped him on the stairs. "Northwestern n'est pas perdu pour toujours. C'est juste pas maintenant. Northwestern isn't lost forever. It's just not now." He stood completely still on the stairs. Northwestern. She had said Northwestern as if it were a place she knew. Not a concept, not an aspiration, but a specific place with specific loss attached to it. Not now, not ever. The careful language of someone who has had to convince themselves that a door is not closed, just temporarily unreachable. He went back upstairs. He sat at his desk for 20 minutes without doing anything. Then he called Devlin. "I need you to look something up for me," he said. "It's a personal matter, not business." Devlin, who had processed enough of Calloway's personal matters to have written a memoir and shown enough discretion to never write one, simply said, "Okay. I need Northwestern University's scholarship records from approximately..." He did the math. Celestine was 26. If she had deferred or left at 18 or 19. 7 to 8 years ago, a student named Celestine Okafor. A pause. "That's going to require a contact inside the university." "I know. Use whoever you need to use." Another pause. "Please." Devlin noticed the please. He said nothing about it. He called back 4 hours later. The record was straightforward once accessed. Celestine Adais Okafor had been admitted to Northwestern University's Weinberg College of Arts and Sciences 7 years ago on a full merit scholarship. Academic achievement, not financial need, the kind of scholarship given to the top fraction of applicants. Her intended major had been listed as International Studies, with a concentration in East Asian languages. She had enrolled for 1 semester. She had withdrawn in January of that year. The withdrawal paperwork cited a family hardship exemption. The scholarship had been formally suspended rather than terminated, which meant it was technically still on record, still dormant, still attached to her name in the university's system, but had not been reactivated in the 7 years since. The reason for the family hardship, not in the university's records, but assembled by Devlin through a separate set of sources, Calloway chose not to examine too closely. The death of Celestine's father in December of that year, which had left her mother as the sole adult in a household that included Celestine, her younger brother Darius, and a grandmother with failing health. Darius had been 11 at the time. He had been diagnosed with asthma the following spring. Celestine had been 19 years old. She had withdrawn from a full scholarship at Northwestern University at 19 years old to go home and hold her family together. She'd been doing it ever since, cleaning houses, paying co-pays, tutoring her brother for the SATs he was now 7 years later preparing to take. A path she had laid out for him from the other side of the door she'd had to close for herself. 3 languages, international studies, a suspended scholarship that was technically still there. Calloway sat with this information for a long time. He did not make any decisions that night. He was very deliberate about that. He made himself sit with it without acting, the way you sit with a diagnosis before you plan a treatment, because he understood that what he wanted to do and what he should do were 2 different questions, and he needed to be clear on both before he moved. What he wanted to do was fix it, immediately, completely. The way he fixed things, with resources and contacts and the particular lever-pulling efficiency of a man who had spent 20 years learning which levers moved which walls. What he should do was more complicated, because fixing things for Celestine without her knowledge or consent was exactly the kind of thing she had told him, in the quiet, precise way she told him everything that she didn't want. She had declined a promotion. She had returned a credit card with $231 spent on other people. She was the person who went back to finish the grout after being told the boss wanted to see her. She was not a woman who wanted to be saved. She was a woman who was saving everyone around her and had simply, quietly, set her own life down for a while to do it. He needed to think about this very carefully. He was still thinking when his phone buzzed on the desk. A news alert, routed through the monitoring service he used for business press, his name in the headline. He picked up the phone. He read the headline. He read it again. The cold that moved through him was not anger, not yet, but the specific chill of a man who has just seen the board reconfigure and recognized in the new arrangement a threat he had not seen coming from the direction it came from. Chicago magnate Calloway Drexen, accused of exploiting vulnerable employee in credit card scheme. Sources close to situation speak out. The byline was a name he didn't recognize. The outlet was a Chicago gossip and society blog with 40,000 followers, and the particular credibility of a source that was not quite credible enough to be taken seriously and not quite unserious enough to be ignored. He kept reading. Sources describe a pattern of behavior in which Drexen allegedly used a financial test to manipulate a low-income domestic worker, creating a power dynamic that multiple observers have described as predatory. The employee, identified only as a household staff member, is said to have been placed in an impossible position, designed to make her appear morally superior to other women in Drexen's circle, then used as a tool to humiliate and discard his long-term girlfriend. Legal experts consulted for this piece suggest the arrangement may raise questions about workplace ethics and employer responsibility. He set the phone down. He picked it up again. He read to the end. At the bottom, the sourcing, a person with direct knowledge of the situation who asked not to be identified. Brianna. He had told her to stop. She had pivoted. This was smarter than the rumor campaign. The rumor campaign was blunt, the kind of thing that could be outlasted. This was in print. This had a byline. This would be screenshot and shared and land in the inboxes of 3 of his business partners before morning. And those 3 partners would forward it to 3 more. And by Monday, there would be a conversation he did not want to have. But the thing that concerned him most, the thing that sat at the center of his chest with the weight of something genuinely serious, was not the business implications. It was Celestine. Her name wasn't in the article. Identified only as a household staff member. But in the circles where this story would circulate, in the world of Chicago's interconnected social layers, where everyone knew everyone's house staff and who worked where and for whom, it would take approximately 48 hours before someone connected the description to the name. He needed to get ahead of it. He looked at the time. 9:47 p.m. He thought about Celestine reading this article. He thought about her mother reading this article. He thought about the word predatory and what it would feel like to have that word applied to your life when the truth of your life was 231.49 and 3 colors of ink in a break room at midnight. He picked up his phone again. This time he didn't call Devlin. He called his publicist. "I need to make a statement," he said. "Tomorrow morning. Live, if possible. I know it's late. I'll explain everything. Are you available now?" "Always," she said. She had been his publicist for 9 years and had learned to read his tone the way sailors read weather. "Give me 20 minutes to get to a computer." "Thank you," he said. He sat at his desk, the lake dark and enormous behind him, and he began to think about what he was going to say. He thought about how to tell the truth. He thought about how to tell it in a way that protected her. He thought about the break room, and the books, and the tea that was still warm, and the handwriting in 3 colors of ink. He thought, she didn't ask for any of this. He thought, neither did I. The article. The segment was scheduled for 8:15. Chicago Morning Live was not the kind of platform Calloway Drexen normally used for personal statements. He had appeared on it twice in the past decade. Once for a ribbon cutting at a South Side development project, once for a brief comment on the city's housing market that his PR team had decided was worth 2 minutes of morning television. He was not a man who sought cameras. He was a man who preferred that his name appeared in the business section rather than any other section, and for most of his career had managed this with minimal difficulty. That was over now, at least for today. His publicist, Nadine, had spent most of the previous night reshaping his instinct, tell the truth, all of it, right now, into something that was still the truth and still all of it, but structured in a way that would actually land. "You can't go in there swinging," she had told him at midnight, sitting at his kitchen table with her laptop open and a cold cup of coffee she kept forgetting to drink. "If you come out aggressive, people will read it as defensive. You need to come out clear." "I am clear," he said. "You're clear here." She tapped her temple. "You need to be clear here." She turned her laptop to face him. The article was still on the screen, the word predatory sitting in the middle of it, like something that had been put there deliberately to cause a specific kind of damage. He looked at it for a long moment. "Okay," he said, "walk me through it." He was in the green room at 7:55, alone, which he had requested. The makeup person had come and gone in 4 minutes. He had no patience for the process, and they had sensed it and been efficient. Nadine was outside with the segment producer. Through the wall, he could hear the show in progress, the particular controlled brightness of morning television, the hosts' voices carrying the calibrated warmth of people paid to be pleasant at a time of day when pleasantness requires effort. He thought about what he was going to say. He had written it out the night before, and then crossed it out, and written it again, and then set the pad aside, and decided to simply know it, the way he knew the things that mattered most. Not memorized, just understood, the way you understand something that's true. A production assistant appeared at the door. 2 minutes, Mr. Drexen. He nodded. He thought about Celestine. He thought about the things she'd said when he'd asked why she hadn't bought anything for herself. There were people who needed it more than I needed a handbag. And the complete absence of performance in it. The way it was just a sentence, just a fact. Delivered the way you deliver facts about the weather or the time. He thought about the word predatory in the article and felt again the cold, clean clarity of a man who knows exactly what he needs to do and is prepared to do it. Mr. Drexen? The production assistant held the door. He stood up and walked out. The break-room television was a 40-inch flat screen mounted on the east wall, a replacement from 2 years ago that no one had asked for and everyone used. On weekday mornings, the early shift staff sometimes watched the news while they ate, not as a habit, but as the kind of passive company that a quiet room with tasks in it occasionally required. Celestine was at the table with a bowl of oatmeal she had been eating slowly for 15 minutes, a small notebook open beside her. Darius's practice test from the previous weekend, corrections pending. She was not watching the television. She rarely watched television. She heard her name before she looked up. And the employee's name is Celestine Okafor, who has worked in my household for 14 months. I want to be completely clear about who she is and what actually happened, because what's been published is not the truth, and she deserves to have the truth told. Celestine looked up. Calloway was on the screen. He was sitting across from the Chicago Morning Live hosts, 2 of them. A woman named Dara and a man named Jeff, who she vaguely recognized from the time she'd walked past this room when the morning show was on. And he was looking directly at the camera in the way he did everything. Without performance, without softening, with the focused directness of someone who had decided what needed to be said and was saying it. Celestine set down her spoon. 3 weeks ago, Calloway said, I gave 4 women, 3 personal acquaintances and 1 member of my household staff, access to a credit card with no spending limit and no conditions. I told each of them there were no rules and no questions would be asked, and then I watched what they chose to do. Dara leaned forward slightly. And what did they choose? 3 of them spent between $18,000 and $36,000 on luxury goods and personal travel. He paused. Not for effect. He was not a man who paused for effect, but with the precision of someone who wanted the next sentence to land without anything blurring it. Celestine spent $231 on children's medicine, groceries for her family, and a medical copay for her brother. The studio was quiet in the way studios go quiet when the thing that was supposed to be a segment has become something else. She then came back to work on time and finished her shift, Calloway said. I offered her a promotion afterward. She declined. She said... He stopped. He looked down briefly, just for a second, and something moved across his face that the cameras caught and that Celestine, watching in the break room, felt in her chest like a hand pressing gently against a bruise. She said she didn't want a reward for her character. She just wanted to keep doing her job. Jeff, the male host, cleared his throat. The article published yesterday suggested that the language used was predatory, that you engineered a situation to manipulate a vulnerable employee. I understand why someone might want people to believe that, Calloway said. He didn't name Brianna. He didn't need to. I also understand that the person who provided that framing to the press did so after I ended a 2-year personal relationship because of what this experience revealed to me about her character. A pause. I'm not here to relitigate that. I'm here because Celestine Okafor's name is attached to a false narrative, and she's a private person who didn't choose any of this, and the least I can do is make sure the actual truth is in the public record before the false version gets any further. And the actual truth is? Dara asked. Calloway looked at the camera. A young woman who could have spent any amount of money she wanted chose to spend it on her sick brother and her family's dinner. And it changed the way I see the world. He stopped. That's the truth, all of it. In the break room, Celestine was very still. Priya came in at the tail end of the segment, poured herself coffee, glanced at the screen, and then looked at Celestine. Are they talking about you? Celestine did not answer immediately. She was watching the television with the expression of a person who has just been handed something they didn't ask for and aren't sure whether to be grateful or frightened or furious, and can't quite separate those three things yet. Yes, she said. Priya looked at the screen. Calloway was fielding a follow-up question from Jeff about the article's sourcing, answering it with the same even, unhurried clarity he brought to everything. Priya looked back at Celestine. He said your name on live TV. I noticed. He called you. He said you changed the way he sees the world. I heard him. Priya sat down across from her. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and looked at Celestine with the particular frank directness of a woman who did not waste time. How are you feeling right now? Celestine looked back at the screen. The segment had moved on. They were discussing something else now, Calloway standing to shake the host's hands in the way guests do when the cameras are still technically on, but the conversation has concluded. Mortified, Celestine said, and something else I'm not going to say out loud. Priya nodded. Yeah, she said. I thought so. She went to his office at 10 o'clock. She knocked. He said, come in. He was at his desk, jacket off, the focused look of someone who had just finished something large and was already inside the next thing. He looked up when she entered, and she saw, very briefly, a look cross his face that he did not quite manage to contain. Relief, she thought, and something warmer than relief, and then both of them filed away behind the professional steadiness he rebuilt in approximately half a second. Celestine. He stood, which surprised her. He didn't usually stand when she entered a room. I was going to come find you. You had no right, she said. He stopped. To use my story. Her voice was level, controlled. My name, what I bought, why I bought it. You had no right to put that on television without asking me first. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you're right. She had not expected that. She had come in here armed with the next two sentences, and he had removed the ground under them in 3 words. I'm right, she said, completely. He moved out from behind the desk. Not toward her, just out from behind it, removing the barrier of the furniture the way he'd sat on its edge that morning 3 weeks ago. I used your story to protect your reputation, which I recognize is a contradiction. I used something private about you to fix a problem that I created by being careless with private information about you in the first place. He held her gaze. I should have asked. I didn't. I'm sorry. Celestine looked at him. She had prepared for defensiveness. She had prepared for the particular variety of justification that wealthy men used when they had done something they believed was for someone else's benefit, the framing that made the action about generosity rather than control. She had not prepared for a clean, unqualified apology delivered with the same directness he applied to everything else. She had not prepared for him to be right about the contradiction. The article would have gotten worse, she said, not conceding, thinking out loud. Without a response. Yes. My name was going to come out anyway. Probably within 48 hours, yes. So you were trying to get ahead of it. I was. He paused. And I also wanted people to know who you actually are, not because it was strategic, just because—" He stopped himself, started again. "Because the version of you in that article made me angry, and the real version of you is worth defending." The room was very quiet. Celestine looked at the desk, the window, the lake beyond it, the grey winter water, the same water she'd watched from the guest suite window on her second day of work, the day she'd thought, "This is the kind of view that should belong to everyone," and never does. She looked back at him. "You should have asked me," she said again. "I know," he said. "I won't make that mistake again." Something in the way he said it, again, carrying the specific weight of a word that assumes a future, landed in her chest and sat there, warm and slightly terrifying. "I accept the apology," she said carefully. He nodded. She turned to go. She was at the door, hand on the frame, the same position she'd been in twice before in this office, the frame like a threshold she kept standing at. When he said, "Can I ask you something?" She almost smiled. She kept her back to him, so he couldn't see it. "You keep asking me that," she said. "I keep having questions." A beat. She turned just enough. "Ask. What do you actually want?" His voice was quiet, not the CEO voice, not the controlled professional voice. The voice she'd heard fragments of in other rooms, the voice that was underneath the others. "Not for your family, not for your brother, for you. If you could have anything, what would it be?" Celestine was silent for a long moment. The question sat in the air between them like something breakable. No one had asked her that in years, possibly ever. Not with this quality of genuine wanting to know, not with this specific patient stillness that said, "I'm not asking because I have already decided the answer. I'm asking because I actually want to know." She turned fully to face him. "I want to finish what I started," she said. "I want to. I gave something up, and I know why I gave it up, and I don't regret it, but I want it back someday." She paused. "I want my brother healthy. I want my mother to have a life that doesn't only consist of worrying. And I want—" She stopped. "What?" Soft. Not pushing, holding space. "I want to feel like someone sees me," she said. "Not the maid, not the credit card story. Me." She said it, and then immediately felt the exposure of having said it, the specific nakedness of an honest answer to a real question, and she straightened slightly, a physical recollection of herself. "That's what I want," she said. "Since you asked." He looked at her across the room, and his expression was something she had no professional category for, something that lived entirely outside the managed lexicon of employer and employee and billionaire and maid and test and television segment. He said, "I see you." 2 words. Quiet. No performance. Celestine stood very still. Then she said, "I'm going to go finish the East Wing." She left. She walked down the hallway and around the corner and stopped, her back against the wall, her hands pressed flat against the plaster, and she stood there for a moment with her eyes closed and her heart doing something she had told it, clearly, repeatedly, with great firmness, that it was not allowed to do. It wasn't listening. It hadn't been listening for weeks. She pressed her hands harder against the wall and breathed, and then she straightened, and she went back to work. The offer she can't refuse. He did it quietly. That was the thing about Callaway Drexen that most people didn't understand, not because it was hidden exactly, but because it didn't fit the story people had already decided to tell about him. The story went, billionaire, self-made, ruthless in negotiations, cold in relationships, a man who moved through the world like someone who had learned very early that sentiment was a currency he couldn't afford and had simply stopped carrying it. The story wasn't entirely wrong, but it missed the part that happened in private. The thank you letters from the children's hospitals he never mentioned. The development projects on the south side that bore other people's names because he'd asked for his removed. The way he had, over the 14 months since Celestine Okafor first walked through the service entrance of his house and started smoothing his guest room sheets with the flat of her palm, paid closer attention to one person's life than he had paid to anything in years. He did it quietly. The first call was to Dr. Renata Osei, a pulmonologist at Rush University Medical Center, who was the best in Chicago at what she did, and who Calloway had met twice at charity dinners, and who had, on both occasions, spoken about her work with the kind of focused passion that made him trust her immediately. He called her on a Wednesday morning, 2 days after the television segment. "I have a patient I'd like you to see," he said. "A child. 17 years old, chronic asthma, managed but not optimally. I'd like to arrange a full workup and whatever ongoing treatment plan you'd recommend. Cost is completely covered. I'd like it arranged privately through my foundation's medical fund." A pause. "Who is the patient?" "His name is Darius Okafor." He paused. "His sister works for me. She's been managing his condition on a housekeeper's salary for 3 years, and I'd like her to not have to do that anymore." Another pause, longer this time. "Doctor, Osei had heard a great deal of things in her career. This landed somewhere specific on the register of things that surprised her." "I'll need to be in contact with the family directly," she said. "I can't treat a minor without parental consent and direct communication." "Of course, I'll have my foundation reach out to his mother. The family will make all the medical decisions. I just want the financial constraint removed. Mr. Drexen." Her voice was careful. "Does the sister know you're doing this?" A long pause. "Not yet," he said. "You understand she may not accept it." "I understand," he said, "but I'd like it to be available to her. Whether she accepts it is her decision. I just want it to exist." Dr. Osei was quiet for a moment, then, "I'll clear time next Thursday." "Thank you," he said. He hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet of his office. Then he opened the Northwestern University alumni directory on his computer and found the name of the Dean of Admissions. The second call took 3 days to navigate. Not because the university was unwilling, but because the layers of bureaucracy between a phone call and an actual enrollment reinstatement were numerous and required. At various points, Calloway's legal team, his foundation's academic affairs coordinator, and one very patient conversation with a financial aid administrator named Glenn, who had been doing this job for 22 years and had, by his own account, seen everything. Glenn had not seen this. "You want to reinstate a suspended scholarship from 7 years ago," Glenn said, reading from whatever was on his screen, "for a student who withdrew mid-freshman year, and you're asking the university to honor the original terms. The original terms, adjusted for 7 years of inflation where applicable," Calloway said, "and I'd like to supplement whatever the university's scholarship covers with a private grant through my foundation for living expenses, so she doesn't have to work full-time while enrolled." Glenn was quiet for a long moment. "Sir," he said, "in 22 years, I've never had a call like this one. I'd imagine not. Can I ask, what's your relationship to the student?" Calloway considered the question with the honest attention it deserved. "She works for me," he said, "and she is the most extraordinary person I have encountered in a very long time. And she gave up her education at 19 to hold her family together, and she has been holding them together ever since, and she deserves to finish what she started." Glenn was quiet again. When he spoke, his voice had shifted slightly. Less administrative, more human. "I'm going to need to run this through the dean's office and the scholarship committee. It's not standard procedure." "I understand. I'd appreciate whatever you can do." "I'll be in touch," Glenn said. "And Mr. Drexen. Yes. She's lucky to have someone in her corner. Calloway looked at the window, the lake, the grey December sky pressing down over the water. I'm the lucky one, he said. I just haven't told her that yet. He ended the call. He held the phone in his hand for a moment, then he set it down and opened his drawer and took out the legal pad and wrote, in the large, clear script he used for things he wanted to be able to read across a room. The letter is coming. Don't move too fast. Let it be ready before you say anything. He looked at what he'd written, then he added underneath, smaller, she will push back. Let her. The Thanksgiving dinner had been a tradition for 6 years. Every year on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Calloway hosted a dinner for the full household staff. Not the performative kind, not the kind where the employer stands at one end of the table and makes a speech about gratitude, and the staff politely eats in their uniforms. The real kind. The kind where Mrs. Hargrove chose the menu, and Calloway sat in the middle of the table rather than the head, and the kitchen staff didn't have to cook because he brought in a caterer so everyone could sit down. It had started the year after his mother died, when he had come back from the funeral to an empty house and realized, sitting in his kitchen at 2 a.m, that the people who made his life functional and orderly and possible had nowhere to put the holiday either. That they were, most of them, far from family or managing complicated situations, and that the least he could do was make sure there was a table. He had done it every year since. This year he called Miriam 3 weeks early. I want to invite families, he said. Staff families. Anyone who wants to bring a parent or a sibling or a child, the table should be big enough. I'll have the dining room extended. Miriam wrote this down. Then carefully, is there anyone in particular you'd like to make sure is invited? He appreciated Miriam. He had always appreciated Miriam. She was the only person in his professional life who asked the question that was actually being asked, rather than the question that was nominally being asked. Yes, he said, I'd like Celestine to feel welcome to bring her mother and her brother if they're able to come. Don't make it a specific invitation. Just make sure the general invitation is warm enough that she knows she's included. Miriam nodded, still writing. And the Northwestern letter. Have you heard back from Glenn? It came through yesterday. He opened his drawer and looked at the envelope. Official Northwestern stationery, his foundation's seal in the corner, the scholarship reinstatement notice inside. I'm going to give it to her at the dinner, if the moment is right. Miriam looked up from her notepad. In 9 years of working for Calloway Drexen, she had learned to read the difference between his business decisions and his personal ones by the quality of deliberateness he brought to each. Business decisions were fast, clean, final. Personal decisions, the ones that mattered to him, the real ones, had this quality instead. Careful, layered, thought about from every angle, approached the way you approach something you don't want to break. He had been making a great many personal decisions recently. I'll make sure the invitation is warm, she said. The dinner was set for the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, which that year fell on a grey, cold Chicago afternoon that smelled of snow that hadn't quite arrived yet, the particular smell of December, deciding whether to commit. By 5 o'clock, the dining room had been extended with 2 rented tables pushed end to end, covered in white linen, set with the good china rather than the staff service. Mrs. Hargrove had requested her mother's cornbread dressing recipe be included in the catering order. Priya had asked for a vegetarian option and received 3. The grounds staff had put cedar candles down the center of the tables, and the room smelled of pine and something warm and indefinably specific to the feeling of people gathered who are glad to be gathered. Celestine arrived at 5:15 with her mother and Darius. Calloway was standing near the entrance to the dining room when they came through the main door. He had positioned himself there without quite acknowledging why, and he saw them before Celestine saw him. Her mother, Adelaide Okafor, was a small woman in her early 50s, wrapped in a good coat that had been well cared for, the kind of coat that communicated dignity rather than wealth. She moved through the foyer with the alert, assessing attention of a woman who had learned to read rooms quickly and trust her reads. She looked at the chandelier and the marble floors and the extended table, and she did not flinch from any of it. She simply took it in and then turned to find her daughter. Darius was 17 and tall, the way boys are sometimes suddenly and all at once tall, as if the body has been biding its time. He had Celestine's eyes, the same specific combination of focus and warmth, and he moved through the room with the careful observance of someone who was trying to look relaxed but was paying very close attention to everything. And then there was Celestine. She was in her own clothes for the first time since Calloway had known her. Not the navy uniform, but a deep green dress, simple, well-fitted, that made her look simultaneously more formal and more entirely herself than he had ever seen her. She had her mother on one arm and her hand resting lightly on Darius's shoulder, and she was moving through his house the way she moved through everything, with the particular combination of purpose and grace that he had spent weeks trying and failing to stop noticing. She saw him. For half a second, just half, barely registerable, something crossed her face that he was learning to recognize now, the brief, involuntary expression that appeared before she replaced it with the professional neutrality he knew was a choice. It was gone in an instant, but he had seen it. He walked toward them. "I'm glad you came," he said. To all three of them, though his eyes found Celestine last and stayed there a moment too long. "Thank you for having us," Adelaide said. Her voice was warm and direct, the voice of a woman who had not come here to be impressed and was not going to perform gratitude she didn't feel. She looked at him with an assessment that was thorough and unhurried, and that Calloway recognized with a start as the same quality of attention her daughter brought to everything. "My daughter speaks well of you." Celestine, beside her, looked at the ceiling briefly with the expression of someone whose mother has just done exactly the thing they privately hoped she wouldn't do. "She speaks well of both of you," Calloway said. "Constantly." This was not entirely true. Celestine spoke of her family sparingly, in the careful way of someone who guards what she loves. But the spirit of it was true, and Adelaide seemed to know the difference between a social grace and a lie, because she nodded once, satisfied, and allowed herself to be guided toward the table. Darius had not said anything. He was looking at Calloway with the frank, measuring assessment of a 17-year-old who has decided to take the full measure of the man who employs his sister and has spent 2 minutes on it so far. "I've heard about you," Darius said. "Good things, I hope," Calloway said. "Some," Darius said. Not unfriendly, just honest. Calloway almost smiled. "That's fair." Celestine, at her brother's shoulder, pressed her hand against his arm once. "Easy." And the three of them moved toward the table and the noise and the warmth of 40 people who were glad to be in the same room. Calloway watched her go. He thought, she belongs here. Not in the mansion. He wasn't sentimental enough to think of it in those terms. But in the room, at the table, with people who were glad. She belonged in gladness, and he wasn't sure she'd had enough of it. He intended to change that. He had the letter in his jacket pocket. He had been carrying it there since the afternoon, the northwestern envelope pressed against his ribs, the way Celestine had once pressed the black card against her heart. He would wait for the right moment. The dinner was exactly what it was supposed to be. The cornbread dressing was perfect. Priya and Louisa argued cheerfully about whether the cranberry sauce needed more orange zest, and then made 2 batches to settle it. Mrs. Hargrove sat at the far end of the table and ate 3 servings of sweet potato casserole and laughed at something Terence said with the relaxed, genuine laugh of a woman who has put down the work of the day and simply is. Adelaide Okafor ate with the focused appreciation of someone who knows good food and respects it. She spoke easily with the people around her. She had the gift, Calloway noticed, of making any conversation feel like the most natural thing in the world, drawing people out without seeming to try. It was the same gift Celestine had, expressed differently. Where Celestine's version was quiet and observational, Adelaide's was warm and direct, filling rooms rather than holding space within them. Darius ate 2 plates and talked about his SAT prep with a young woman from the ground staff who had apparently also taken the SATs recently and had opinions about the math section. His inhaler sat on the table beside his plate, unremarked upon, part of the ordinary furniture of his life. Calloway sat in the middle of the table as he always did, and for most of the dinner he talked to the people around him. Terence about the grounds, Glenn from maintenance about a repair he'd been putting off, one of the newer kitchen staff whose name he was learning. But he was also, always, peripherally aware of Celestine. She was 3 seats down on the opposite side of the table, between her mother and Priya, and she was not different from how she was at work, but more fully present. She laughed more easily. She reached across to refill her mother's water glass without looking. The automatic tenderness of someone who has been doing small acts of care for the same person for so long they no longer register as actions, just as the shape of love in motion. He watched her laugh at something Priya said and felt the familiar chest tightening that he had stopped trying to diagnose and simply acknowledged now, the way you acknowledge weather. After the dinner, after the dishes had been cleared and the tables had settled into the comfortable aftermath of a good meal, the room still warm and loud with conversation. Calloway stood and walked to the far end where Celestine was sitting alone for the first time all evening, her mother having been drawn into a conversation with Mrs. Hargrove and Darius having moved to the other room with the young SAT woman to continue their debate. He sat down in the empty chair beside her. She looked at him sideways. Not surprised, he had noticed, stopped being surprised by him. "Thank you for this," she said quietly. "My mother hasn't had an evening like this in a long time." "I'm glad." He paused. "Can I give you something?" She looked at him directly now. "That depends on what it is." He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the envelope. He held it toward her. She looked at it without taking it, reading the return address, the university seal, her own name typed on the front in clean, institutional font. She was very still. Calloway. Her voice was low. She had used his first name without noticing. "What did you do?" "The scholarship was never terminated," he said, "just suspended. The university agreed to reinstate it. There's a supplemental grant from my foundation for living expenses, so you don't have to choose between school and supporting your family." He paused. "You can read all the details. There's no obligation, no timeline, no conditions. If you don't want it, I'll respect that completely, but I wanted it to exist. I wanted the door to be open." Her eyes were on the envelope. He watched her jaw tighten slightly, the particular tightening of a person who is managing something large and does not want to manage it publicly. "Northwestern," she said. "International studies. Your original concentration is still on record." She picked up the envelope. She held it in both hands. She did not open it. She just held it. The way you hold something you're not sure yet how to carry. "I told you I didn't want—" "You told me you didn't want a promotion because you bought groceries," he said. "This isn't a reward for that. This is me recognizing something that was taken from you at 19 and making it available again. That's all." He met her eyes. "You don't owe me anything for it. You never did." Celestine looked at him. In the candlelit room, with the sound of her family and his staff around them, with the smell of pine and good food and the approaching winter, she looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not the professional neutrality, not the careful warmth she rationed so precisely, but something underneath both of those, something unguarded and real and slightly terrified, and more beautiful than anything he had seen in a very long time. "I need to think about it," she said. "Take all the time you need." She nodded. She put the envelope in her lap. She looked back at the room, at her mother laughing, at Darius gesturing broadly in some point he was making to his new acquaintance, at the tables and the candles and the 40 people who had made an ordinary Wednesday feel like something worth remembering. "This dinner," she said quietly. "Did you do this because of me?" He thought about lying. He thought about the diplomatic answer, the socially graceful answer that redistributed the specificity into something general and manageable. "I do it every year," he said. "This year I did it a little earlier and a little bigger because I wanted your family to be here." She absorbed this. "That's honest," she said. "I'm trying," he said. She almost smiled. The edge of it, the almost, was enough to make the whole evening worth it. Then the door to the dining room opened, and everything changed. Confrontation at Thanksgiving. The door opened, and Brianna walked in like she owned the room. She had always known how to enter a space. It was one of the first things Calloway had noticed about her, back when noticing things about her was still pleasant. The way she calibrated her presence to fill exactly the amount of space she intended, not a degree more or less. She entered rooms the way a conductor raised a baton, the gesture itself a signal that something was about to begin. Behind her came a man Calloway didn't recognize. Late 30s, polo shirt, the slightly too alert expression of a journalist at work. Behind him, a young woman with a phone raised, angled toward the room. The conversations at the table died in sequence, the way sound dies when something shifts the air. First the people nearest the door, then rippling outward until the dining room had gone from warm and full to something else entirely. Calloway was on his feet before he had consciously decided to stand. "Brianna." His voice was flat. Not surprised, he had known on some level that she wasn't finished. He had underestimated the specific shape of what unfinished would look like. "You need to leave." "I'll leave when I'm ready," she said. She was wearing the kind of composed expression that required the specific type of anger that had cured into something harder and colder than its original form. Not rage, which was hot and imprecise, but the thing rage becomes when it has been sitting with purpose for 3 weeks. She scanned the room once, rapidly, with the assessment of someone who has come in with a plan and is locating the elements of it. Her eyes found Celestine. Adelaide Okafor had stopped talking to Mrs. Hargrove. She was watching the door with the still reading attention of a woman who has navigated enough difficulty in her life to recognize it immediately upon arrival. Darius had moved instinctively to a position closer to his mother. Celestine had not moved. She was seated at the table, the Northwestern envelope in her lap, and she was watching Brianna with an expression that Calloway had never seen from her before. Not fear, not the careful professional neutrality, but a settled, quiet stillness, the stillness of someone who has been through enough to know that the best response to a storm bearing down is not to run, but to find your footing. "Who are you?" Adelaide said. Directed at Brianna, clear and direct, the voice of a woman who had not come here to be afraid of anyone. Brianna looked at her. Something flickered across her expression. Then she looked back at Celestine. "I'm the woman whose life your daughter destroyed," she said, "in case no one told you." The room was completely silent. Calloway moved. He crossed the distance between himself and Brianna in 8 steps and placed himself between her and the table, not physically blocking, but the kind of placement that is itself a statement, a boundary drawn with a body. "Get out of my house," he said, quiet. The quietest he had spoken all evening. "I have every right." "You have no rights in this house. You were not invited. You are trespassing, and I will call the police if you don't leave in the next 30 seconds. He looked at the journalist. "You too. Whatever she told you, whatever she promised you, leave." The journalist hesitated. He had the look of a man who had been promised something significant and was recalculating whether it was worth what was happening. Brianna stepped around Calloway. He turned. She was looking directly at Celestine now, and she was speaking in the particular voice of a woman who has decided that if she cannot have what she came for, she will at least make certain that everyone in the room carries the weight of what she is about to say. "You must be very proud of yourself," Brianna said. "You cleaned his house for a year, and now you're sitting at his table at Thanksgiving. How long did that take you to plan?" Celestine looked at her. She didn't answer. "Because that's what this is," Brianna continued, and her voice had shifted now, the composed exterior cracking just enough to let through what was underneath, which was genuine pain wearing the costume of cruelty. "That's what you people do. You find someone with money and you perform for them. You perform virtue. You perform sacrifice. You perform—" She gestured at the room, at the dinner, at all of it. "This. And the man is so starved for something real that he doesn't notice it's a performance." The woman with the phone had been filming. Calloway turned and looked at her with an expression she apparently found persuasive, because she lowered the phone. He turned back to the room. He looked at Celestine. She had not moved. She had not spoken. She was sitting at his dinner table with the Northwestern envelope in her lap, and her mother beside her, and her brother behind her. And her expression was the most painful thing he had ever seen on a human face. Not because it showed pain, but because it showed the active, effortful work of not showing it. The muscle it took to sit completely still and make your face say, "This does not reach me," when everything in the room was designed to reach her. He thought about how much it cost her, how much everything cost her always, in the specific currency of her own reserves, and how she paid without letting anyone see the transaction. He turned to Brianna. "You're done," he said. "Get out of my house." Brianna looked at him with something that had moved beyond anger into something more honest and therefore more complicated. The look of a woman who had genuinely loved someone and genuinely lost them and had arrived at this room through grief rather than strategy, even if grief had made the worst strategic choices imaginable. "You're really choosing her," Brianna said. "I already chose," he said, 3 weeks ago, in a transaction report, with a grocery receipt. He held her gaze. "Go home, Brianna." She looked at him for a long moment, then she looked at Celestine one more time, and the look was different this time, the aggression exhausted out of it, leaving something rawer and less intentional behind. Then she turned and walked out of the dining room, and the journalist followed, and the woman with the phone, and the door closed behind them with the sound of something that was finally, completely over. The room was silent. Then Adelaide Okafor, in the clear, unhurried voice of a woman who had raised children to know their value and was not going to let this moment pass without consequence, said, "Celestine, baby, look at me." Celestine looked at her mother. "You hear me?" Adelaide said. "None of that lands. None of it. You understand me?" Celestine nodded once. The nod was tight and careful, the nod of a person maintaining something. Calloway moved toward her. He walked around the table and crouched at her side, so that he was at her level rather than above her, instinctive, not calculated, and he said quietly for only her, "Are you all right?" She looked at him. "No," she said, "honest." The first time she'd answered that question honestly, instead of with, "I'll be fine," or "It doesn't matter," or "I'm okay." "What do you need?" he said. She looked around the room, the staff, her mother, her brother's face tight with controlled adolescent fury on her behalf, and the weight of being seen and witnessed by all of them, the specific vulnerability of having your dignity attacked in a room full of people who care about you, seemed to press down on her all at once. "I need a minute," she said. "Outside." She stood. She picked up the Northwestern envelope and held it. She looked at her mother, a look that contained an entire conversation, a shorthand built over 26 years. And Adelaide nodded, the small nod of a mother who is releasing her child to manage something herself. Celestine walked out of the dining room. She walked through the foyer, past the chandelier and the marble floors, and she pushed open the front door of the mansion and stepped out into the December night. It was snowing. Not the heavy, committed snow of a Chicago winter at full strength, but the preliminary kind, fine, tentative, the snow equivalent of a held breath. The flakes were small and dry, and they settled on the black iron railings and the front steps and the shoulders of Celestine's green dress, with the delicate impermanence of things that know they are temporary. She stood on the top step with her arms around herself and her face lifted slightly toward the sky, eyes closed, the cold settling over her like something useful. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't turn. She knew the footstep. Calloway came to stand beside her on the step. Not behind her, not in front. Beside, the way you stand with someone when you're not managing them, just accompanying them. They stood in the snow for a moment without speaking. "She's not wrong," Celestine said. "Not about the accusation." Her voice made clear she wasn't conceding the accusation. People do look at someone like me in a house like this, and they assume the worst. And I can't make them not assume it. I can only know the truth myself and hope it's enough. "It's enough," Calloway said. "You don't get to decide that." "No," he said. "I don't. You're right." He paused. "But I can tell you what I see. And what I see doesn't look like a performance to me. It looks like the least performative person I have ever met." She was quiet. The snow fell around them, fine and patient. "I'm so tired," she said. Not dramatically, simply. The statement of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and is briefly, in the cold and the dark, setting it down just long enough to say so. "I'm tired of being careful all the time, of making sure everything I do can't be misread, of never taking up too much space because someone will decide I'm taking advantage." She paused. "I'm very tired." "I know," he said. She turned and looked at him. The fine snow had settled in her hair, on her eyelashes, on the shoulders of the green dress. Her face, in the dark, was open in a way he had never seen it. The walls down, not because she'd chosen to take them down, but because the evening had simply been too much to hold them all against. "That envelope in my hands," she said. "Is that real?" "It's real. You called Northwestern. You arranged a scholarship reinstatement for me. For you. Without asking me first." He held her gaze. "I know, I should have asked. I've been trying to fix things instead of asking what you want. I'm aware that's a problem." A pause. "I'm working on it." She looked at the envelope. "It's Northwestern," she said, almost to herself. "International Studies," he said. "East Asian Languages concentration. Your transcript is intact. The scholarship committee reviewed your original application and found no reason to change their assessment." He paused. "You were exceptional at 19. You're still exceptional. You just had to put your life on hold to take care of the people who needed you." Her jaw was doing that thing again, the tightening, the managing. "Calloway." His name in her mouth, again without the Mr. Drexen, the formal buffer gone entirely. "Yes. Why are you doing this?" The question hung in the snow between them. He had been waiting for this question. He had been planning his answer. The careful, measured, appropriate answer that acknowledged his feelings without putting pressure on her, that was honest without being declaration, that respected every boundary she had drawn while also being finally the truth. He looked at her, standing in the December snow, in her green dress with the northwestern envelope pressed against her chest, and he said, "Because you are the first person in 20 years who made me want to be better. Not richer, not smarter, not more successful, better." He paused. "And I know that's not something you asked for. I know you didn't come here to change anyone's life, but you changed mine, and I'd like very much to spend as long as you'll allow me trying to be worthy of that." Celestine was very still. The snow fell. She looked at him, this careful, controlled, quietly extraordinary man standing on his own front step in December with snow in his hair, saying the truest thing he had probably said in years with the same direct, unperformed clarity he brought to everything. And she felt the thing she had been pressing down for weeks rise up through her chest like something that had finally decided it was done being pressed. "I don't know what to do with you," she said. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Not tonight, not until you're ready. I just wanted you to know." She looked at the envelope again. Then she looked at him. "I'm going to go back inside," she said, "because my mother is in there and she's going to worry." "Of course," he said. She turned toward the door. "Celestine." She stopped. Didn't turn fully. Just stopped. "The envelope is yours regardless," he said. "Whatever you decide, it belongs to you." She was quiet for a moment. Then so quietly, he almost didn't hear it beneath the sound of the city and the fine December snow. "Thank you." She went back inside. Calloway stood on the step alone for a long time. The snow settled on his jacket, his shoulders, the iron railing beside him. He stood there until the cold was fully committed, and then he stood there a little longer, looking at the front door she had closed behind her. He thought, "I told her." He thought, "She didn't pull away." He thought about the way she'd said his name, Calloway, twice in one evening, without the formal distance of Mr. Drexen, without even noticing she'd crossed the threshold. He was not a man who read too much into small things, but he had built a career on knowing the difference between a door that was closed and a door that was simply not yet open. He went back inside. The dinner resumed, quieter, warmer, more deliberate than before. Mrs. Hargrove cut the pecan pie with the focused solemnity of someone who believes that pecan pie, properly tended, can fix a great deal. Adelaide Okafor, re-established at the table, ate her slice and said it was the best she'd had since Atlanta, and Priya took this as a personal victory. Darius sat beside his mother and ate 2 pieces and didn't say much, but every few minutes he looked across the table to where Celestine had returned to her seat, and each time he looked, some tension in his shoulders eased slightly. The involuntary relief of a young man reassured that his sister is okay. Calloway sat in his place in the middle of the table. Across from him, 3 seats down, Celestine was talking to her mother in a low voice, her hand on Adelaide's arm, and whatever she was saying made Adelaide press her lips together in the specific way of a mother who is trying not to cry in public and succeeding. Barely. Celestine looked up, across the table, directly at him. For 1 full second, before she looked away again, she let him see her face without the management, without the walls, just her face in the candlelight with the snow coming down outside the tall windows and her mother beside her and the northwestern envelope on the table next to her plate. In the snow, she came back outside at 10 o'clock. Calloway was in his office when he heard the front door, the particular sound of it, the weight of the old mahogany, and he stood without thinking and walked to the window. She was on the steps again, same green dress, arms around herself, face turned up toward the snow, which had committed now, falling in slow, serious curtains over the street and the iron railings and the parked cars below. He went downstairs. She heard him behind her and didn't turn. "My mother and Darius are getting a car," she said. "I told them I'd be inside in a minute." "Take your time," he said. He came to stand beside her. The snow was thick enough now to muffle the city. That specific Chicago winter silence, the sound of 8 million people agreeing to be quieter for a while. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said before." He waited. About being worthy of something. She turned to face him, and her eyes were direct and clear and done managing. "You don't need to earn me, Calloway. I'm not a prize for good behavior." "I know," he said. "That's not what I meant. I know what you meant." A pause. "I'm not something to be deserved. I'm just a person. I'm tired and stubborn, and I fold fitted sheets better than anyone you've ever met, and I gave up my scholarship at 19, and I haven't stopped being angry about that, quietly, every single day." She stopped. "That's who I am. Not the grocery receipt, not the credit card story, not the woman who changed your life." Her voice caught just slightly. "Just me." He looked at her. "Just you," he said, "is the whole point." The snow fell between them, patient and indifferent. She was the one who reached out first. She took his hand, not dramatically, not as declaration, just the quiet, deliberate way she did everything, and held it, and looked at him, and let him see her face completely. He didn't say anything, neither did she. They stood in the snow until the headlights of her mother's car appeared at the end of the block, and then she squeezed his hand once, let go, and turned toward the steps. "Good night, Calloway." "Good night, Celestine." She went down the steps and into the car, and the door closed, and the taillights disappeared into the snow. He stood on the step in the cold for a long time. Then he went back inside, sat at his desk, and for the first time in 20 years did absolutely nothing productive. He just sat there, smiling, in the quiet. What she bought changed everything. 6 months later, on a Sunday morning in May, Calloway found her in the kitchen. She came on Sundays now by choice, not to clean exactly, but because she said the house was quieter on Sundays and she thought better in quiet spaces, and because the kitchen had good light in the mornings, and she liked to cook when she was working through something for her international relations seminar. He had stopped pointing out that she had a perfectly good kitchen of her own, because she had pointed out once, with the patient precision of a woman who has made up her mind, that she knew where she wanted to be on Sunday mornings, and it was here. He had not argued again. She was making biscuits. He could smell them from the hallway, butter and flour and the particular warmth of a kitchen at work, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before she noticed him, watching her move through the space with the focused ease of a person who is completely at home. Darius was healthy. Dr. Osei had adjusted his treatment plan in January, and his last 2 checkups had come back clear. He was applying to colleges, 3 engineering programs, 1 pre-med, 1 because Celestine had quietly suggested that a school with a strong French department wouldn't hurt a young man with an aptitude for languages he hadn't fully explored yet. Adelaide had a catering contract with 2 corporate clients on the north side, seed-funded through a small business grant from the Drexen Foundation that had been processed anonymously, and that Adelaide had accepted with the specific shrewd grace of a woman who knows the origin of a good thing and chooses not to interrogate it. Celestine was 3 months into her first semester back at Northwestern. She had cried once in his car on the way to campus the first morning, not sad crying, just the kind of crying that happens when something you stopped letting yourself want is suddenly real. She had straightened up before they arrived, pressed the tears away with the back of her hand, and walked through the gate with her shoulders back and her bag over one arm like she had never left. He had watched her go through the gate and felt something in his chest that he had stopped trying to name and simply lived with now, warm and constant, the way you live with the best things. She turned from the counter and saw him. "You're up early," she said. "You're here early," he said. "The biscuits needed time." He crossed to the counter and leaned against it, watching her work. After a moment, he reached out and tucked a strand of flour-dusted hair behind her ear, and she went still for exactly 1 second, the old reflex, the old careful distance. And then she leaned into his hand, just slightly, and kept working. He slid the small box across the counter. She looked at it. She looked at him. "Callaway." "I know," he said. "I know the timing is. I know you have 2 years of school left, and your mother's business is still new, and Darius is applying to schools, and there are approximately 40 things that are more immediately pressing than this." He paused. "I also know that I have been in love with you since a Tuesday in November when I watched you tuck a black card against your heart and walk out into the Chicago cold to buy medicine and groceries for your family." He held her eyes. "And I have been patient. I have been very, very patient, and I would like at some point in this calendar year to ask you a question." She looked at the box. She looked at him. Then she pushed it back across the counter. His face didn't fall. She watched to make sure. It didn't. He just raised his eyebrows slightly. "Open it yourself," she said, "and get down on one knee. If you're asking the question, ask it properly." He laughed. It was the best sound she had heard in a year. Unguarded, full, real. He picked up the box. He came around the counter. He looked at the kitchen floor briefly, consideringly, then looked back at her. "This floor was just mopped." "I know," she said. "I mopped it." He got down on one knee. He opened the box. The ring was simple, a single stone, no excess, the kind of ring chosen by a man who had paid close attention to the woman he was buying it for. She looked at it and felt the warmth that had been growing in her chest for 6 months rise up all at once. "Celestine Adaez Okafor," he said. "You spent $231.49 of my money on a sick child and a family's dinner, and it was the best investment I have ever witnessed." He paused. "Marry me." She looked at him on the kitchen floor, flour on the counter behind her, biscuits in the oven, the Chicago Sunday morning light coming through the window that faced the lake. Her favorite light, she had told him once, the light that made the city look like it was just beginning. "Yes," she said. He stood. He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it once, briefly, practically, the way she looked at everything she intended to keep. And then she looked at him, and she kissed him with the same quality she brought to every other thing, certain, warm, completely without performance. From the oven, the biscuits announced themselves. She pulled back, looked at the oven, looked at him. "The biscuits?" she said. "The biscuits," he agreed. She turned back to the counter. He stayed close enough that she could feel him there without looking, the specific warmth of a person who has decided where he belongs and stopped moving from it. She pulled the biscuits out. She set them on the rack. She stood at the counter with oven mitts still on her hands and looked out the window at the lake, silver bright in the morning light, and felt, for the first time in a very long time, since she was 19 and the world had been briefly, entirely full of possibility, that the door she had closed was all the way open again, not despite everything she had carried, because of it. Upstairs, in Callaway's office on the wall beside his desk, hung 4 receipts in a single frame. 3 were luxury, a Birkin, a Rolex, an Aspen ski package, long numbers, designer names, the evidence of people given everything, choosing more of everything. The 4th was a grocery list, children's Tylenol, rice, bread, eggs, baby formula. Chicken thighs, a medical copay, $231.49. Below the frame on a small card in Callaway's handwriting, "This one changed my life." The end